Cleopatra. It's a name that echoes through history, doesn't it? I mean, we've seen her in movies, we read about her, she's become this icon of ancient Egypt. But how much of that is really, Hollywood hype?
Right.
In this deep dive, we're going beyond the kind of romanticized version of Cleopatra and really trying to uncover the real person, the brilliant strategist behind all of that legend. And the really interesting thing is we're doing it all using information from her Wikipedia page.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can find in sources that you think, oh, I already know everything about this. But when you really dive in,
Exactly.
there are these little gems in there that you're like, wow, I never knew that.
Absolutely. And we're not just going to kind of rehash the basic facts here. We're going deep.
Yeah.
We're going to be analyzing, the details that really give us insight into Cleopatra's ambition, her political genius. But to really understand her, we have to understand her world. And it was a world on the brink of massive change.
Exactly.
So let's rewind the clock back to Cleopatra's time. Now, this isn't the ancient Egypt of like pyramids and pharaohs you might be picturing in your head.
Right.
She actually ruled during this period when Egypt was controlled by the Ptolemaic dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
So these are Greeks who had held power for centuries by this point.
Yeah, and this is where I think people's understanding of Cleopatra sometimes gets a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
Because I think, oh, Egyptian queen. But it was much more complex than that. By her time, the Ptolemies are really clinging to power. The Roman Republic is expanding its influence across the Mediterranean, and Egypt is firmly in their sights.
That's true.
So she's not just navigating the internal politics of her kingdom.
Right.
She's playing chess on a global scale, essentially with Rome as her most dangerous opponent. And that makes her heritage even more interesting, right? Because even though she's a Ptolemy, a descendant of these Greek rulers, the Wikipedia article is very clear about this. Cleopatra wasn't your typical Ptolemy.
No.
She embraces Egyptian culture in a way that her predecessors had not. I mean, she's one of the few rulers in her dynasty who actually bothers to learn the Egyptian language.
Think about that for a second. The Ptolemies, they were seen as outsiders ruling over a conquered land. And most of them didn't even try to bridge that cultural divide. But Cleopatra learns the language, she adopts the religion, she presents herself as the embodiment of an Egyptian pharaoh.
And that right there tells you so much about her strategic mind, right?
Yes.
Because she understood to solidify her legitimacy, especially with Rome breathing down her neck, she needed the support of the Egyptian people.
Of course.
And what better way to do that than to embrace their culture and claim this ancient heritage as her own? She was a master of image. She understood how to use perception to her advantage.
It's like looking at a statue of Cleopatra dressed as the goddess Isis. That wasn't just for show.
Exactly.
That was a calculated move to solidify her power, to create this sense of divine right to rule.
A brilliant strategy.
It really was. It set her apart from her predecessors, and it gave her a powerful edge in a world that was changing very rapidly around her.
Absolutely. And speaking of predecessors, we have to talk about Cleopatra's own family because things get complicated.
Yes.
We're talking power struggles, alliances, betrayals, and that's before we even get to the Romans. The Wikipedia article, it delves into this family drama, but specifically highlights Cleopatra's relationship with her brother, Ptolemy the 13th. And this is where we have to kind of, address the elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
They were married.
Right, the sibling marriage. I mean, it seems utterly bizarre to us now.
Of course, yeah.
But for the Ptolemies, it was completely standard practice. They believed it kept the bloodline pure, power consolidated.
Right. It's one of those things where you have to kind of step back and realize you can't judge the past by today's standards.
For sure.
But what is fascinating is, even despite this custom, the Wikipedia article mentions that Cleopatra actually tries to rule alone initially.
Yeah.
She pushes Ptolemy aside.
That's so interesting because it speaks volumes about her ambition.
Yeah.
This was not a woman who was content to share power.
Exactly.
Even with her husband.
Even with her husband, who was also her brother. I mean, she was playing the game of power from the start, and she was playing to win.
And that ambition leads her to, well, one of history's biggest names, right? Julius Caesar.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a clash of titans.
I know. So this is where things get really interesting. You see, Cleopatra's Wikipedia page actually talks about how differently their first meeting is portrayed depending on what source you're looking at.
Right.
So, like, we have Plutarch, who gives us this very dramatic kind of scandalous story of Cleopatra having herself smuggled into Caesar's presence wrapped up in a rug.
Yeah, like something out of a movie.
Right. But then you have this other Roman historian, Dio, and he presents a much more straightforward encounter. Like, no rug. She just goes to Caesar directly,
Yeah.
uses her, her charm, her intellect to make an impression.
And it just goes to show you with someone like Cleopatra, we
Yeah.
have these conflicting accounts. We have these whispers through the centuries.
Mhm.
It makes it so hard to really know the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So which version is correct? I mean, who knows? But that's part of what makes studying someone like this so fascinating.
Right.
Because it's not just cut and dry history.
Absolutely. And the fact that both of these stories existed, even back then, shows you how carefully she cultivated her own image.
She really did.
She was aware of how she was perceived, even down to how do people tell the story of how I first met Caesar?
It's incredible. And that's something we got to keep in mind, I think, as we dig deeper into their relationship.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just a love affair.
Oh, no.
Like it's often portrayed, but
It was a calculated political move.
exactly.
I mean,
right.
she's aligning herself with Caesar, right, at a time when he's embroiled in this massive Roman civil war.
Yeah.
She's picking a side in a battle that could decide the fate of her entire kingdom.
That's-
And what's interesting is she wasn't content to just kind of sit on the sidelines and be like, well, I hope this goes well. The Wikipedia article talks about how she actually helped Caesar secure his position in Egypt.
Right.
She even helps him regain control of Cyprus during this time.
So this wasn't just about romance. It was about survival.
Exactly.
Hers and the survival of her dynasty, her children.
Yes. And speaking of the children,
Right.
Cleopatra has a son with Caesarion, who she later declares King of Kings, which, I mean, come on, this is expert level power play right here.
Yeah.
She is directly linking her lineage to Caesar and by extension, the future of Rome,
She was playing the long game.
thinking generations ahead. But of course, as we know, Caesar's reign doesn't last forever.
No, it doesn't.
And his assassination sends shockwaves through Rome, and it leaves Cleopatra in a very, very precarious position.
She's got to figure out, okay, what's next?
Exactly. All new players, new rules, and that's where Mark Antony comes in.
Oh, boy. This is where it gets, I think, even more complicated for her, right?
Right. This is not just a love triangle. We are talking about a clash of empires here.
Huge.
And right at the center of it, Cleopatra, playing a very dangerous game.
And I think nowhere is that more evident than in the event that's mentioned in our outline, the donations of Alexandria.
No, yes.
This was a turning point, wasn't it? It's like she and Antony essentially took a map of the Roman world and were like, no, we're going to redraw this.
It was bold. I mean, imagine Cleopatra dressed as the goddess Isis. She's standing beside Mark Antony in Alexandria. She's declared Queen of Kings, her son Caesarion, King of Kings. And then to really hammer it home, they start handing out Roman territories as gifts.
Right. Like, oh, and this one goes to my son.
To her children by Antony.
It's almost like you said it's audacious, but it's almost breathtaking, the audacity of it.
Yeah.
Because they were challenging the very core of Roman power.
Exactly. And while some people in Rome might have been willing to turn a blind eye to the relationship, this was too much. Giving away their territory. That was a direct threat.
Yeah, that's not going to fly.
No.
No.
And that's exactly what their enemies, particularly Octavian, Caesar's heir, they used this to their advantage.
Of course.
They painted her as this dangerous foreign queen, a threat to Rome's stability.
And that takes us to the Battle of Actium, which, I mean, it wasn't just a military defeat. It was a personal tragedy for Cleopatra.
It really was.
And, it's fascinating. Our sources give us these little glimpses into what she was thinking at the time. Specifically, this phrase that's in our outline, I will not be led in a triumph.
Oh, wow. Chilling words.
They really are. They show you how well she understood how Roman power worked. How they use these public spectacles to solidify their rule.
Exactly. To parade a captive queen through the streets of Rome.
Can you imagine?
That would have been the ultimate humiliation.
And Cleopatra, even in defeat, she was like, nope, not going to give him that.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, did she ever really have a chance at a different ending? Or was her story always destined to be a tragedy? It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even after all these centuries, her story still has this power.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, what is it about Cleopatra that we're still so drawn to? Is it the love affairs? Is it the political intrigue? Or is there something more to it than that?
I think it's all of that, honestly.
Yeah.
But also the fact that she was a woman operating and really thriving in what was very much a man's world.
Right.
She wielded power in a way that very few people, male or female, ever have. And to do that while dealing with the fall of her dynasty, the rise of Rome, I mean, talk about pressure.
It's true. It's almost Shakespearean, the way her life plays out.
It really is.
And speaking of plays, her Wikipedia page talks about how even after her death, she's immortalized. In statues and writing, she becomes a legend.
It's interesting, isn't it? You think that after her defeat, her rivals, especially Augustus, they'd want to erase her.
Right, just wipe her out of history completely.
Exactly, but that's not what happened. In fact, the Wikipedia article mentions that statues of Cleopatra were left standing in Rome.
Really?
Even after Augustus became emperor.
Wow. So it's almost like he knew.
Like he understood.
That, to get rid of her completely would be to diminish how powerful she was.
Exactly. It's like by leaving those statues up, he was turning her into a cautionary tale.
Oh, interesting.
A symbol of what happens to those who dare to challenge Rome.
Look at her, this powerful queen, now frozen in stone.
Right. A reminder of his victory.
It's a power move in and of itself.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show you Cleopatra's legacy. It's complex.
Yeah.
She was both vilified and admired. And maybe that's what's so enduring about her story.
I think you're right, because it reminds us that history, it's not black and white.
No.
It's full of these gray areas, and we had these individuals who are grappling with these impossible choices, and I don't know, it's fascinating.
And it still resonates today. I mean, her story, it makes you think, what would I have done in her position?
Right. Would I have had the courage, the ambition to do what she did?
And in the end, isn't that the mark of a life truly lived? When centuries later, people are still debating your choices.
I think so. That's Cleopatra for you.
Ah.
A true force of history.